Hey folks, this is Astus. It is finally here, my class tier list. Thank you so much for your patience, guys. I put a lot of work and thought into this, and I hope you will like it. Now, if you are new to my channel, hello. I make videos on optimization and tactics in Baldur's Gate 3. If you are interested in that, I hope you will subscribe and check out my backlog of videos. Like I said earlier, this is my class tier list, where I'll be ranking all of the classes on a tier list, and also to a certain extent the subclasses available in this game. I have completed roughly 4 playthroughs now. Technically only completed, beginning to end 2, but I played 2 more well into Act 3 before I just restart. I've tested all of these classes, but not every single subclass. I'm saying all this because I'm going to give some opinions now that you probably will disagree with me with, and you'll want to debate with me in the comments, and that's great. I welcome that. But just please don't treat me like some random scrub. This is a game I've worked very, very hard at. I've been covering it since early access, and every opinion I'm about to express here has been thought out very carefully. All right, now before we dive into the tier list, I gotta say some things by way of disclaimer. First off, this list is weighted primarily towards single class builds. That's because I think multiclassing is too complicated for me to really make a tier list. And I think if you have a firm grasp of what makes classes good as single classes, that multiclassing is actually fairly straightforward after that. So single class primarily. I also assume certain self-imposed rules about the way that you play the game. Of course, you don't have to play with them. I do. And they are what I assume for this tier list because I have to assume some things about the way the game is played. So just as a gloss, for example, I assume tactician difficulty, no karmic dice, no reloading, limited respecs, and limited long rest. These rules are designed both to make the game more difficult, but also to preserve tactical depth. For example, if you reloaded every available chance that you got in this game, even though it's technically allowed in the game, it would completely ruin it. So I have to assume you're not doing that. If you want those rules in more detail, I link to a complete list of them in the description below. Finally, let's talk about the tiers and what they mean. I have a 5-tier system, which I use for all of my tier lists. It's S, A, B, C, and R, P. I can just tell you right now, the classes are actually fairly well balanced in the state of the game right now, so I'm not going to be using all of these tiers, but we'll go through them all anyways. Starting with S, this is my highest tier. An S tier class is one that is just really difficult not to take in your party. It is meta defining and it tends to outperform other classes in its role. A tier are solid classes at their role. You can usually replace an S tier class with an A tier class, and you're not going to notice that much. They're that good, right? They get the job done, often in a variety of builds. B tier are classes that tend to underperform. You can get top tier performing builds out of these classes, but it's in very niche team compositions or with very niche builds. C is for classes that are totally underperforming and weak. Even if you min-max them as best as you possibly can, you're probably just better off going another class. And RP tier are classes which are completely outmuscled by other classes in a competing role, that there is no mechanical reason to take them. The only reason to take them is for roleplay reasons, which I think are very valid reasons to pick a class, but this video is about tactics and optimization. So I can just tell you right now, there are going to be no RP tier classes in the game, which is a very good sign. So, all right, let's dive into the list now. So I have here a list all of the classes, the base classes, and then I have another list of all of the subclasses. We're going to go through them class by class, starting with Barbarian. I give the Barbarian a B tier. Now, I've gone back and forth between A and B for the Barbarian because there are some builds in it that are actually really, really good and can be the crutch of your team comp, but they're very niche, and that's kind of what B tier ends up being for me. Is not that you can't get good builds out of this class, but that they're kind of niche builds. Fundamentally, the problem with the Barbarian is that it is a primary striker class that does less damage than most other strikers, but is more durable. But this is a game that greatly favors damage over durability. And I'm saying that as someone who actually values durability in this game quite a bit, but damage is usually better. So Barbarians lose out in the trade. The other big problem is that their class-defining feature, in my opinion, was reckless attack. This gives them advantage on every attack, and that's what made them such strong strikers in early access, for example. In early access, if you didn't know, I had Barbarians S tier. But the thing is getting advantage on every attack is now something that you can pretty easily do through itemization on fighters and monks and things like that. Basically other competing striker classes. So Barbarians have kind of lost their niche. Rage is good, but it's limited. It's very limited per long rest, and I assume limited long rests in my rule set. The Barbarians suffer for that as well. So yeah, that's the state of Barbarian. If we go to the subclasses now, Berserker subclass is actually decent. I could see it being the very low end of A tier as a throw build, which I think is a shame. I don't like throw builds as much because I just find them kind of goofy. They're fun. They just seem a little goofy to me. I don't know how else to say it. But yeah, Frenzied Throw is a good ability, and especially early game, a throw build Berserker will be one of your best strikers early, without a doubt. If you're doing anything that isn't a throw, they're much, much weaker because they start accumulating a negative to accuracy on their attacks, and that really sucks. Now, where are my other barbarians? Here they are. Wildheart. I like Wildheart quite a bit. I consider it the best, and I haven't even fully explored all of the options for Wildheart barbarians. The big one I do these days is a bleed maim build, where now your barbarian actually becomes a kind of controller, and on the right team comp you can just overwhelm enemies with CC and completely cancel their turn, so it just doesn't matter that you do less damage than other strikers at that point. Wildheart Barbarian's really, really quite good. Do not sleep on it. And then we have Wild Magic Barbarian. This is one I've played in my very first playthrough from level 1 to level 12, and it's good, but it's very RNG dependent, and it's actually kind of support oriented, which is very strange for a barbarian. And in the end, support wise, what it gives is just a worse version of a paladin, so you're pretty much always better off going paladin. I just don't think there's as much potential for the Wildheart Barbarian. If you want a support striker, there's just too many other classes that do that way better than the Wildheart. So that said, flavor-wise, it's really fun. And that is the Barbarian class. Next up on our list is the Bard. Okay, Bard, where does it go? No, it's easily S tier. The Bard class is so stacked in this game, which is hilarious because in the original Baldur Gate series, at least for me and my friends, the Bard was a meme. You know, you slap Garrick on your team because he's hilarious, not because he's useful. If we could remake Garrick in the 5th edition system of the game, he'd be one of the best companions in the game because this class is so stacked. What makes the Bard class so good? Well, it's a full caster class with a pretty decent spell list, and then you get magical secrets, which allows you to augment that list. So already a great caster. It gets inspiration for support, and inspiration is really good. It's a short rest refreshing ability that adds quite a bit, and you can usually utilize it on a reaction or in a bonus action, so it's not stopping you from casting your spells. It gets Song of Rest, which has been buffed by Larian compared to what it is in tabletop. Song of Rest now just gives you another short rest per long rest, which in a set of rules where your long rests are limited, this is increasing the value of your long rest by roughly 50%. And that's so valuable. Probably one of the most impactful single class abilities in the entire game. And it kind of makes the Bard the linchpin of a composition where you want to stack other classes which get short rest refreshing abilities. And the Bard is a class with really good short rest refreshing abilities with its inspiration, right? And then finally, when we get to the subclasses, you'll see the Bard can get extra attack. It is the only true full caster class with extra attack, and there's so many items in this game that benefit controllers that can make multiple attacks. The Bard is just insane. It can do it all. So let's talk about its subclasses now. Starting with College of Lore. I give College of Lore, again, easy S tier. It's one of the better subclasses for the Bard because It gets more magical secrets and magical secrets earlier, and that's nice, but the main feature that it's getting is cutting words, which allows it to have a kind of control debuff variant of the Bard's Inspiration. On a reaction, you can debuff enemies in multiple ways, and one of those ways is their saving throw. So by late game, you can just straight up, using your reaction, take a 1d8 off of the saving throw roll of enemies. And it's really hard to overstate how insane that is. Control spells in this game are so good. You really want to focus around controlling. And now the Lore Bard is not only one of the best controllers in the game, it's one of the best supports for other controllers in your party. Yeah, it's just so good. So it's kind of the caster variant of the Bard, and it's phenomenal. Then there is the College of Swords, which is the attack variant of the Bard. It adds a little bit of striking to this control support class, and it actually adds quite a lot of striking. A Swords Bard with Slashing Flourish is a good striker, a great controller, and a great support unit all in one. It can really just do everything, and it's one of the top 5 class-subclass combos in the game right now, in my opinion. And in fact, it's just so good that this other very good subclass, which is the College of Valor Bard, kind of loses out. It's also a Bard which gets extra attack, and I mean, that's awesome. The problem is that its combat inspiration just isn't as good as the flourishes that the Swords Bard gets, so I'm going to just knock it down a tier for that reason. These are the 2 bards you really want to focus on. Next up is Cleric. Cleric is A tier. I really go back and forth on Cleric between A and S. It's one of 2 classes that I want to put in S, but my S tier actually gets quite crowded, and I end up downgrading it to A, but what it gives you is so good. I mean, fundamentally what it gives is Turn Undead, which is a really good feature in this game. It has a phenomenal spell list with some absolute bangers like Sanctuary, Bless, Spirit Guardians. Oh my goodness, Spirit Guardians. Insane. Hero's Feast. Freedom of Movement. Really good support primary and control secondary spell list for the Cleric. And yeah, that's what it is. Most of what you get from a Cleric, you get from its base class. So every single Cleric subclass is good, but we can go over them now. Some are better than others. The big 3, in my opinion, are Life Cleric, deserves an S tier. A Light Cleric. Light Cleric is actually better than all the others, in my opinion. I think it's the best Cleric. And where is this last one? Tempest Cleric. These are the big 3. You can't go wrong picking one of these. So Light Cleric is at a slightly more offensive variant of the Cleric, but it's just getting so many spells to your spell list, which are good. And then it gets Warning Flare, so good, and one of the best channel divinities in the game. That's what makes Light Cleric the best. Life Cleric just gets one really good channel divinity, which is Preserve Life. One of the few healing abilities in the game which I actually consider worth doing. And then other than that, it's just a vanilla Cleric. And then Tempest Cleric. Tempest Cleric's a kind of blaster Cleric, which you want on wet blasting compositions. It also gets heavy armor, so does Life. So both of these 2 are quite good. I consider Light the best. For the other Cleric variants, Tempest is probably, a close 4th, and not Tempest, Trickery. Some of you might be surprised to hear that, but I think Trickery Cleric is much better than people give it credit for. First off, its channel divinity is not as bad as people think. I think. No, I actually haven't cast it that much, so I'm not saying like it's insanely good, but when I have cast it, my understanding is it actually functions like a decoy now, so it will draw enemy aggro, and that's good. If you can burn an enemy action or spell, that's always good. But the big thing that the Trickery Cleric offers is just a really good spell list. It's a Cleric with the Fear spell and with Mirror Image, and yeah, those are great spells. It also gets, I think, Dominate Person later in the game. Those are very valuable spells to add to Cleric spell list. So yeah, that's why I put Trickery fourth. What else is there? War Cleric, Knowledge Cleric, Nature Cleric. I think these are the remaining three. I like Knowledge quite a bit, but it's not really offering that much in combat, except for some pretty good spells. Like, it has a decent spell selection. War, I think there's like one spell in there that it offers that the clerics otherwise wouldn't get that's good. Channel Divinity is decent, and it can make attacks with its bonus action, a very limited amount per long rest. Not bad, but also not great. And then Nature, I find Nature is the worst. I think Nature is actually just missing an ability. The Larian didn't implement its level 6 ability. So what it is right now is just a cleric that has Shillelagh, which is interesting, but, you know, not as good as what the other cleric subclasses are offering. Next up on our list is Druid. I'm putting Druid in B tier. You know, it feels like Druid deserves better than this, but the problem with the Druid class is its spell list. It has a very inflexible spell list that's just chock-a-block full of mostly offensive-oriented concentration spells, and you can only really cast one concentration spell in a fight, right? So that's what holds the Druid back as its spell list, but honestly, Druids are good. They are full casters, and Wild Shape is phenomenal. I mean, late game, changing to an Owlbear with a concentration spell up is an efficient thing to do in a fight. Owlbears, I think I'm attacking 3 times in a round. I don't know how that's possible, but I find my late game Owlbears are just triple attacking. So their attack isn't that good. It's hard to build around it, but when you're attacking 3 times, I mean, yeah, that's really good. You get so much durability from Wild Shape. I mean, we're talking like hundreds and hundreds of hit points per long rest. So yeah, like, Wild Shape is great. It's just the spell selection that ends up holding it back. I think there are top performing Druid builds, but they're just a little niche, and that's what B tier is in my system. So if we go over the subclasses now, all the subclasses are equally good in my mind. I'm just going to put them all together here, but we will discuss them. I think Druid of the Land is probably the best because it offers more spells in your spell list, and that's the weakness that's holding Druid back. It also offers Natural Recovery, which is such a good scaling ability. If you put a ton of levels into Druid, Natural Recovery is recovering really valuable spell slots. That is phenomenal. Probably the best Druid. Circle of the Moon Druid I hear is doing much better in this last patch, but I haven't really got a chance to test it. In the end, to me, it's just a Druid that can Wild Shape on a bonus action. That's mostly what it's giving you. The extra Druid shapes aren't performing better than just going Wild Bear. So that in itself isn't good enough to make it, you know, better than Circle of the Land, in my opinion. And then finally, Spore Druid. I'll probably put Spore Druid a little better. It's a non-shapeshifting variant, and that is tough because the shapeshifting is really good. Wild Shaping's phenomenal. But yeah, it does give a lot of durability, tons of temporary hit points to make up for the lack of Wild Shaping. It can do a little bit of extra damage on its weapon attacks, which is not really what I want from a Druid. But it gets those really awesome items. Armor of the Spore Keeper, I believe it's called, which can do that AoE haste cloud, is quite good. So this is probably where I'd rank them. Really, you can't go wrong with any of them. All of them are going to be Druids at the end of the day. And that's the Druid class. Next up is the Fighter. Fighter is S tier. I hope this isn't a controversial take. I feel very strongly about it. The thing about the Fighter is that it gets a combination of double extra attacks, so it's 3 attacks per action, and the action surge ability. And this just makes it one of the best upfront damage dealers in the game, one of the best consistent, reliable damage dealers in the game. It's one of the best classes for stacking on-hit effects, which are insanely good in this game. And you really just can't go wrong with it. I consider it the best striker in the game. Yeah, definitely one of my favorite classes. So now let's go over subclasses for the Fighter. We can start by taking Champion and just putting it in RP tier. I mean, of course, because of the base Fighter chassis, it probably deserves somewhere in A. I just hate the Champion subclass so much. All it's really offering you is a little bit better crit chance, and I do not consider crit fishing builds to be a good strategy, especially on the Fighter. And so it ends up just being a subclass that offers nothing to the game. It just adds nothing at all. And I hate that. I wish they could have just implemented a different subclass and we could have more options. But anyways, that's the champion. The other two fighter subclasses are actually good and interesting. So we're going to spend our time discussing those, starting with the Battle Master. The Battle Master is going to get these maneuvers, which refresh on a short rest, making it great for any kind of bard composition. What can you do with those maneuvers? I mean, the big one is still Riposte. Riposte allows you to make an attack as a reaction, and fighters are already building around their attacks being good because they're making so many. So weaponizing your reaction like that, extremely valuable. There is also a maneuver which buffs your accuracy. I use that one a lot. There's maneuvers that help with your durability, and there's some crowd control maneuvers, and all of those are good. They offer quite a bit. I kind of consider this the vanilla fighter. It's the Battle Master. Let's talk about the Eldritch Knight. This may surprise people, but I consider the Eldritch Knight, up here as one of the top 5 best subclass combinations in the game. So it has that fighter chassis, which is phenomenal. And then it gives it quite a bit more survivability by being able to cast Shield and Mirror Image. Both of these spells are high spikes of survivability. They're going to give you a lot of survivability for a very short duration. But that's all you need, because in 1 or 2 turns, the fighters can just kill everything on the map. So that's the big thing that makes Eldritch Knights good, but they also get this insane ability, Eldritch Strike, where whenever you attack an enemy, which you always want to be doing with this class, it has disadvantage on saving throws against any effect that you apply on it. And I say it that way really specifically because it's not the way the tooltip describes it, but the way the tooltip describes it is wrong. Right now, any kind of on-hit effect through your weapons that requires a saving throw, enemies with Eldritch Strike on them are going to have disadvantage on that saving throw. So I, for example, used an Eldritch Knight build that stacked Encrusted with Frost, and even though the DC is stuck at 12, I was still freezing bosses at the very end of the game fairly consistently just because they have disadvantage on that saving throw. So now you're a fighter that's killing everything and also just getting free CC at random on your turns. It's so good. And then also you can combine with Band of the Mystic Scoundrel and with the Hat of Arcane Acuity, items I've mentioned before, to just start CCing everything. So now you're one of the best strikers in the game, and then you become one of the best controllers in the game. Seriously, it's that good. All while being really quite durable. Just an insane class, Eldritch Knight. Definitely one of my favorites. I consider it really fun and interesting. I will have Eldritch Knight builds coming down the pike, I am sure. So that is Fighter. Next up on our list is Monk. I give Monk an A tier. It's convenient to talk about Monk right after Fighter, because I just see Monk as a more boring version of the Fighter, but it's almost as good. The big thing Monks get is lots of attacks, unarmed attacks, which you can combine with the Tavern Brawler feat to hit pretty much every time and do tons of damage. And that's it. Other than that, they're like kind of squishy for a striker, very mobile for a striker. But yeah, that's it. They just make a lot of attacks, and those attacks hit, and they do really good damage for the amount that you have hitting. If we go over their subclasses now, Way of the Open Hand is clearly the best. It's adding more damage, a little bit of CC on your Flurry of Blows, and that's enough to make it better than any of the other Monk subclasses. And then I haven't even gotten to test these as much, but just the little bits of testing I've done, Way of the Four Elements and Way of the Shadow are both offering some decent things, but they're not really altering the fundamental thing that monks do, which is just punch people, and Way of the Open Hand is where you want to go for punching people. So that's the monk class. I haven't tested this one as much, so if there's something I'm overlooking, please let me know in the comments. Paladin is up next. Paladin is S tier, easily total Giga Chad class. The Paladin is a primary support class with secondary striking, and even as a secondary striker, it gives you quite a lot of damage. So, yeah, great support, probably best support class in the game, with good striking, deserves an S tier. What it does for support is it has its auras, The best one being the Aura, which allows you to add your Charisma modifier to the saving throws of all allies in a small AoE, but big enough that you can get your team into it. And then it also can cast the Bless spell. It's a half caster, and it gets Bless on its spell list, which is very valuable. Clerics that also get Blessed tend to want to use their concentration slot on Spirit Guardians in my runs. Spirit Guardian is just so good that ends up being what you do on your Clerics, which put Paladins on Bless duty, and that's totally fine. Paladins are happy to do it. You cast Bless, you get everyone in your Aura, and suddenly you have enough durability for your saving throws that you can actually now reliably shrug off saving throw attacks. And it's the only way to really do that in this game. And it kind of makes the Paladin mandatory on any build that wants a little bit of durability. It's just so good. And then after that, they're an extra attack class that can also smite. Smite adds a lot of damage on crits. All around just phenomenal. So let's talk about their subclasses now. Paladins get 4 subclasses. Oath of Devotion is the worst. It's the clear loser, which is a shame. I really like this in early access, but the big thing that it gets is, of course, Sacred Weapon. But the problem with Sacred Weapon is that it takes an action. So you're already spending at least one action on Bless, and then you spend another action on Sacred Weapon. You're already into round 3. And with the way this game goes, by round 3, most fights are already kind of becoming decided, right? And then you kind of want Paladins to have a little bit more upfront damage through Smite, right? Smite's one of the best upfront damage abilities. So if you're spending the first 2 turns buffing, it just, it's good, but it's not as good as what these other subclasses are offering. The clear winner for Paladins is Oath of the Ancients. Oath of the Ancients is just wild. I mean, such a phenomenal subclass. The big thing it offers is better aura. Its level 7 aura halves the damage that you take from spells, which is actually good. A lot of the other level 7 auras that Paladin subclasses get aren't good. And then it also gets Healing Radiance at level 1. At level 1, it gets this Channel Divinity that heals in an AoE that scales with your level at a rate that's just too good. Also, it procs twice. It's just too good. It's too much AoE healing on a bonus action. So yeah, it's one of the best healers in the game is the Oath of the Ancients Paladin, hands down. And it's probably the best class for spreading those on-heal effect abilities you can get through itemization. Right at the beginning of the game, you can get those. So yeah, Oath of the Ancients Paladin, so tanky, such a good support, such a good healer, and still manages to do quite a bit of damage. Really, really good class. Now, Oath of Vengeance and Oathbreaker are also good, a little bit more offensive-oriented Paladins, which isn't really the reason why I pick Paladin. But still, they can fulfill that role. I'm not sure what to say about this. They're just, they're offensive versions of the Paladin. The Oathbreaker is particularly good on summon compositions, so keep that in mind. That is the Paladin. Next up is the Ranger. I'm putting the Ranger in B tier. I really wish I could bump him up to A, but in the end I just decided on B. The reason I feel like they could go higher is that their subclasses are so good. But the Ranger base class is abysmal, probably the worst base class in the game. It's a half caster, like the Paladin, but it just gets nothing good like the Paladin does. Its spell list sucks, probably the worst spell list I've ever seen. And then it gets these like Natural Explorer or Favored Terrain, and none of them are that good. I mean, they give you some extra resistances or whatever, but compared to the auras of a Paladin, they're terrible. So yeah, it ends up being it's just an extra attack. Like, that's all you really get from the base class. An extra attack and some resistances. But the subclasses are phenomenal. The subclasses are good enough, and that they are what really define the Ranger. The best one, by far, in my opinion, is the Hunter. The Hunter deserves A tier, in my opinion. I'd probably put it somewhere around here, to be honest. And this is probably a surprise, because the word going around in forum communities of Baldur's Gate 3 is that the Hunter Ranger is the worst subclass in the game, but that is completely wrong. When you hit level 11 with the Hunter Ranger, your attacks become AoE, either through volley or through whirlwind, and it makes it the best on-hit striker in the game easily, hands down. I mean, you're making like, sometimes you can make like 15 to 20 attacks in a round. Hasted with Elixir of Bloodlust, you're just making an absurd amount of attacks. Now they're spread out, they're not concentrated, so that's the reason they can't really compete with the fighter. But if you have any item which spread crowd control on hit or debuffs enemy on hit, that's where the hunter starts to shine. Also, any weapon that heals, like the Sword of Chaos, you're healing spikes so much once you get Whirlwind, you can't die. You're unkillable as long as you're able to make attacks, right? So as long as you're not stunned or paralyzed. A Freedom of Movement Minsk full class Hunter Ranger with the Sword of Chaos and the Parry Up to Wound Closure is unkillable in an AoE fight. Like, if there's targets for him to hit, he can't be killed. So yeah, I consider the Hunter really, really good. It's just, it hits that spike so late in the game. That's its problem. So I usually don't play with a Hunter in my party. I just swap Minskin, I make him a Hunter, and by the time you get Minsk, you're already level 11. So yeah, Hunter Ranger, really good. You should definitely try them. They're super fun. Beastmaster Ranger is also good. It just gets an injection into its action economy with its beast summons. So it's hard to build around it to make it better than it is, but you also just can't go wrong with any build. It's just, you know, a target that absorbs attacks and can also make attacks itself. And that is actually really great in an action economy game like Baldur's Gate 3. And so strangely, I consider the weakest ranger to be Gloomstalker. And it's the best ranger if you're doing a multi-class. It gets really good front-loaded abilities. But yeah, in a full-class build, Gloomstalker just isn't really offering enough. It's actually one of the worst in the game on a full-class build. So that's the Ranger. Next up is Rogue. Rogue is also going to be B tier. I consider it the worst class. Yeah, probably the worst class in the game, which is a shame. It's actually bumped up from the C tier that I had it in early access. The problem with the Rogue is that the designers of this game have just drastically overvalued sneak attack as a strategy. The strategy of sneak attack is to trade making many attacks for making one really powerful attack. And it's not good. It's not a good strategy. First of all, because it's bad for stacking on-hit effects, and like I've been saying through this whole video, on-hit effects with Larian's itemization are so good. So, like, for example, if you compare the Arcane Trickster to the Eldritch Knight, the Eldritch Knight's making so many attacks it can quickly, in one round, stack up Helmet of Arcane Acuity. Arcane Trickster, it's not getting that Helmet of Arcane Acuity stacks. So, you know, and that's just the weakness of the one attack strategy. Also, it just ends up being very RNG. If you low roll either in damage or if you roll a 1 on your attack roll, you lose so much because so much is dependent on hitting that attack and that attack dealing damage. Also, for some reason, sneak attack seems to be capped at level 9 on my runs. I'm not sure if that's a bug that they'll fix, but you're getting capped at 5 dice 6 sneak attack dice, and that's not enough. The damage is so low. Yeah, even a full class rogue just isn't dealing enough damage by late game. So they're a primary striker class that is worse at striking than most secondary striker classes, like Cleric, for example. They're just not good strikers. But the reason I have them at B tier is they're so good at skills. They get expertise, which is great, and they get this ability, I can't remember what it's called now, but it allows them to turn all rolls below a 10 on a skill check into a 10. So 10 is their minimum roll. And with that, you can actually start reliably doing stealth strategies in this game, which can be very, very good. You could just avoid all aggro and attack everyone freely, and no one ever sees you. And so in a solo build, I think rogues could actually be quite good, but you know, on a full team composition, they're just avoiding a lot of hits late game and doing kind of mediocre damage. If we go to their subclasses now, all of the subclasses are good. Probably Thief is the best, just because you're getting an extra bonus action attack, which you can combine with Sharpshooter to actually get fairly good striking damage. So really, it's the least rogue as far as the rogue strategy goes of making one attack, right? It's making multiple attacks. So for that reason, it's the best, but it's kind of boring. Assassin and Arcane Trickster. I really like Assassin, but it's probably the worst of the rogues. Still, getting at least one crit in a encounter is very interesting and good. You can make some multi-class builds around stacking crit effects, so that is fun. But yeah, Arcane Trickster is probably better overall. It's a more durable version of the rogue because it can cast Shield and Mirror Image. It has some really good, especially upfront crowd control abilities that only really the Lore Bard and the Sorcerer can compete with. So yeah, this is probably where I'd rank the rogue subclasses. Next up is Sorcerer. Sorcerer is going to go the best class in the game. I consider the Sorcerer the best class in the game. Now, it has kind of been nerfed this last patch, so maybe I need to rethink this, but I'm just going to go with it, and you guys can let me know your thoughts in the comments. But in my opinion, Sorcerer is one of the best strikers, one of the best controllers, and one of the best supporters all in one kit. And so how could I give it anything else but best class in the game? We can go through these one at a time, starting with striking. The striking strategy for sorcerers is to go Eldritch Blast, which is a cantrip that they do not normally get in their class, but you can get it multiple ways through your feats mostly. And then once you have Eldritch Blast and you have the right items for it, you can start dealing really respectable damage. Eldritch Blast, Quicken Cast, second Eldritch Blast cast. And then if you're proccing Elixir Bloodlust, you can get a third Eldritch Blast cast. Each of those has 3 rays. You're making so many attacks in a round, it's phenomenal. Now, the reason it's been nerfed is it used to be you could add the Draconic Bloodline Sorcerer damage to your lightning charges on Eldritch Blast. That has been changed now. But still, you can add your Charisma to the damage of Eldritch Blast through the Potent Robe. So a Potent Robe Sorcerer, Quicken Spell, Eldritch Blast, so good. Really, it's dealing a lot of damage, and striking isn't even its best role. Its best role is probably controlling, which the reason it's so good at is because it can reliably impose disadvantage on those key targets with the meta magic. I think it's Heightened Spell. Heightened Spell's so good. Yeah, so Heightened Spell, hold monster on a key target late game can just completely decide a boss fight for you. And there really aren't other classes that can just reliably, get advantage on their control spells like that. The closest is a very RNG dependent divination wizard. So best controller in the game, best pure controller in the game, especially if you combine with that Lore Bard, right? So you can debuff their saving throws. You just start hitting on round 1 the most potent control spells on the target you want at will. It's incredible. And then finally, a support. This one I may be stretching a little bit, but Twin Taste is still one of the best support combos, I think, in the game, and only sorcerers can do it. So yeah, they're just bringing everything you want in a class. They're so good. Oh, by the way, they get Constitution saving throw proficiency for free just at level 1. I mean, yeah, wow. Sorcerers are phenomenal. Let's go over their subclasses now. All of their subclasses are good. It's pretty much the base class that makes this class, so you can't go wrong. Draconic Sorcerer is the kind of damage version, the more striker version of the Sorcerer. Much less so these days because of what I just mentioned, but you can still go Fire Ancestry and cast Scorching Ray to get pretty much the same effect as it was before. So that can even be good if you have the Hat of Fire Acuity. Yeah, so Draconic Bloodline is still quite good. My personal favorite, and the one I consider the best, is actually Wild Magic Sorcerer. Wild Surges are insanely good. Like, you can just turn a dragon into a sheep, and that just wins the fight for you. It turns like a difficult fight into nothing. You don't even need to expend resources. But it's so RNG dependent, right? Like, that's the thing about the Wild Mage Sorcerer, but I love it. I play into it all the time. Because the negative effects aren't negative enough that you can't reliably win the combat still. But the positive ones, if you high roll on a Wild Surge, the fight is just over. And yeah, so Wild Magic I consider the best. Storm Sorcerer is also good. It is the less RNG dependent. It has a better spell selection, which is actually good for sorcerers. Their one weakness is they don't get a lot of spells to choose from, and the Storm Sorcerer gives them more, including Create Water, I believe, so it's really good on a wet blasting composition. But yeah, you just can't go wrong with any variation of Sorcerer. They are all phenomenal. Down to our last two now, we've got Warlock. Warlock is going into A tier. Same place I had it in early access, and it's still pretty much the same fundamental class. It's a pretty good controller and a pretty good striker, but it doesn't synergize that well with most other classes. Striking-wise, Eldritch Blast is still your best option. Even though you can go Pax of the Blade to get extra attack, I find that just going... just using Eldritch Blast instead of weapons is usually a better strategy. That said, if you don't have anyone that's using the Helmet of Arcane Acuity, a Pact of the Blade Warlock is very good for that. And then control-wise, Pack Magic is a little worse than full caster spell progression, but it's not that much worse, right? You're basically a full caster. And then you could be a full caster with extra attack if you take Pact of the Blade. Yeah, just all around a very, very good class. Subclass-wise, you can't go wrong with any of the subclasses, but the Fiend Warlock is the best in my opinion, followed by the Great Old One, and then I put Fey Ancestry at the least, but most of what you're getting from this class is from the base class. Like I said, can't really go wrong, so this is where I'd rank the subclasses. And that brings us to our last one. It's Wizard. Wizard also goes in A tier. It's the other one I mentioned, beside Cleric, where these are two I could see myself putting in S, but because I want this beautiful symmetrical graph, I am putting Wizard in A, and so here's the final tier rankings. What is the Wizard class? It's the best pure caster class that I can think of, just in terms of like spell selection and spell cast per long rest. It's getting Scribe Scroll, which gives it every spell that you want in the game, including some exclusive spells that only wizards can get. And those exclusive spells are good. And then it's getting Arcane Recovery, which allows you to just make more casts of spells per long rest. And those two things together is what makes a wizard a wizard. Also, by the way, its spell list is the best spell list in the game. I mean, it's got every banger you can want. Fundamentally, a control class, but especially if you go Abjuration Wizard, they make pretty good strikers as well. So let's go over their subclasses. The best ones, I consider 3 to be in kind of the top tier, and they are Divination. It's kind of vanilla control wizard. Kind of boring in my opinion, but probably the best control wizard overall. Then there is, I believe it's this one, Abjuration, which is the striker wizard, and again, very good. Gets lots of good features throughout the game. A Magic Missile Abjuration Wizard really slaps late game. So, yeah, there's that. And then there is, Evocation Wizard is the offensive one. Abjuration is the kind of defensive support-oriented wizard, my personal favorite to play. Yeah, so these are the top 3. For the others, there's kind of like a mid-tier of Enchantment. It's a really good controller wizard, but probably not as good as Divination. Necromancy is actually a wizard subclass that plays differently. Like, all of the other wizard subclasses are just wizards, right? A wizard with a slight change, but Necromancy Wizard is like the summoning wizard, and that's really fun. I like that. But overall, as a strategy, it's probably not better than the 3 I mentioned. What else? Conjuration. Conjuration's this one, I believe. It offers some interesting abilities. It can cast Create Water, which is great for wet blasting comps. It can get a lot of just free movement, and that's nice, but kind of hard to use. So if you're a creative player, I think you could get a lot out of this subclass, but otherwise it's just going to be like a normal wizard, and that's kind of whatever. Transmutation offers some interesting support abilities, but it's so boring. Yeah. Honestly, its support abilities are quite good, especially that its ability to brew double potions. Like, if you add it up in the long run of a game, that's probably giving you more support than the Abjuration Wizard. But yeah, it's just kind of boring. It's just like more potions, and yeah. So, I don't know. It's maybe like around here, I guess. The worst one is Illusion. Illusion really suffers, in my opinion, but I haven't played around with it that much, so maybe there's something I'm missing on the subclass. You guys can let me know in the comments. And that is it. That's all the subclasses, and here is our class tier list. Beautiful symmetrical for an S, A, and B. Nothing in C, which I think is the sign of a well-balanced game. Nothing in RP. These are my rankings for now. If I change my opinion, I will be updating that in a reference sheet, which I have not made yet, but it will be linked on my website, and I will also post a link in the description of this video. So for now, here's where I'm at. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Sorry for the delay on this video, guys. I've been very, very sick the last week, completely unable to get out of bed for days at a time, and you could probably still hear it in my voice. Anyways, I am recovering now, and I'm excited to get back to it. I'm going to thank some people, all of my supporters on Patreon, guys. Thank you so much. But for my S-tier supporters, Alcaris, Indra, Jeff, Marchitar, Root 1, Todd, guys, thank you. I could not do this without you. And a special thank you to my main advisor, Aurelian, and the guy who started it all, CA Castaway. Gentlemen, I won't let you down.